it's no more Oklahoma, no more Texas, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah all enter the conference. They've added multiple teams in the past few years as well. So the Big 12 looks very, very different, Corey. Um, Still good teams at the top, though, and at least one of them, a couple of them actually, in Kansas State and Oklahoma State, have been around for a while. Kansas is 9-1. UCF, who's now been in the conference and established themselves, 9-1 as well. But the favorites, Utah, plus 250. Their win total set at 10. The one thing they've got in common with another one of the favorites or shorter favorites to win this conference is stability at the head coaching position, right? Kyle Whittingham's been around for a while now, like Mike Gundy has been around for a while in Stillwater. And those are the two teams I come into the season looking at in the Big 12. I know Kansas State's going to be good. I know Kansas should be good. And Iowa State, I think, is still worth keeping an eye on. Since we talk about head coaches, the one there is definitely worth talking about. But I think for me anyway, Utah, and to a greater extent, Oklahoma State, given the 7-1 price on them to win the conference, are where I look when I look in the Big 12.
And I think you nailed it with those teams right there. This is probably a 3-team race. Maybe you'd be able to get a fourth team in there, depending on how you view Kansas and Colorado. But I'll start at the top right here, and it is the Utah Utes. Cam Rising back healthy this season, and we know how elite that defense can be. One of the best home field advantages in college football that's very rarely spoken about. And they actually have a schedule that sets up pretty nicely to see that this team is going to at least be in the Big 12 championship game. They come out, they do have a road trip early in the season in their fourth game when they have to go to Oklahoma State. I believe this might be their first trip to Stillwater or maybe their second trip to Stillwater. So that's going to be a very interesting spot, a new spot for them. Then they come home that next week to an Arizona team, which I think is going to be pretty good this year as well. But then after that, they really should be able to coast. Depending on what you think about Colorado, they do go to Colorado late in the year. Then they have a home game versus Iowa State. But more than likely, Utah is going to be a 1-2 loss Big 12 champion. I think with Cam Rising and that defense, they are the team to beat in the Big 12. Now, how far can they push it? I think they get a bye. So I don't think you'll see a first round one college football playoff game from Utah because I think they'll play the next week. So I think they get a bye. Now, can they compete? Can they contend and compete for a national championship? They can't beat the Georgias. They can't beat the Oregons. They can't beat the Ohio States. They're probably a top 10 team, playoff team that will get a bye because of their conference. But the Utah Utes, listen, this is going to be a good season. Very tough team, very tough home field advantage, tough on defense. Cam Rising, that quarterback. I like the Utes to win the conference.
Yeah, short numbers, agree with you. Plus 250 to win the Big 12. 2-1 to go to the CFP, and if they do it, you would think they'll do it as conference champs. So yeah, like you said, they'll get one of those 4 buys into the second round of the college football playoff. I just keep coming back around on Oklahoma State, Corey.
Yeah,
7-1, like I said, to win the Big 12. Same number to go to the CFP. So no real variance there. Although the variance is tight on other teams, there's none on Oklahoma State. 7-1 to win the conference, 7-1 to go to the playoff, which tells me they may be one of the few teams in this conference who can make it to the playoff without winning the conference. And the path there would be simple. The path would be, okay, you beat, if you're Oklahoma State, early in the year, in one of the first huge games of the season, you've got an opportunity to play Utah at home September 21st. If you're the Cowboys, you beat Utah at home on September 21st. And then you run the table through the rest of your schedule, including a win at Kansas State the following week. You show up to the Big 12 title game down in Jarrah World, right? Against Utah, perhaps, and you beat Utah. And that's the way the Big 12, I think, gets 2 teams into the playoff. I talked a lot when we talked ACC the other day about the ACC just being a one-bid league. I think the Big 12 can get 2 teams in, and I think that's the path. What has to happen is you've got an undefeated team who has beaten their conference championship game opponent earlier in the season, losing to that one-loss conference championship game opponent who they beat earlier in the regular season. And now you've got a conference champ and another really strong top 10 ranked team with one loss each. They both go to the playoff. I think for me anyway, I like Utah, who you mentioned, but Oklahoma State is the other team I like to get there. You could take an outside run maybe at a Kansas State being a part of that scenario as well. Because like I said, they play Oklahoma State at home on September 28th, have a big game against Kansas in October. But in order to get to that point where you've got two highly ranked teams, one may be undefeated, one with one loss in the Big 12 title game, the best scenario for my money anyway is on Oklahoma State being a part of that mix again at 7-1 to either win the conference and or go to the college football playoff.
And they're going to have the opportunity to do it because what you see is their schedule lines up and they actually get them in back-to-back week, the two teams that they're going to need to beat. So in order for Oklahoma State to make it, right, let's just start with the Big 12 championship game because they're not going to go to the playoff if they're not in that game. So they get Utah come to their building. Like you say, Utah and Stillwater, that's going to be very tough for the Utes. Then the next week, they go to Kansas State and their dynamic quarterback, Avery Johnson. I think this right here could be a game that trips up Oklahoma State. Now, what Oklahoma State does have is they have a running back in Ollie Gordon. Is probably the best running back in Oklahoma State since we saw Barry Sanders down there. He's going to be a guy that's probably going to be on the stage when we get to the Heisman Trophy ceremony later on, later on this year. So he is going to be in that mix. They're very strong in the trenches. They're going to run the football well. Now, the quarterback position is a little bit shaky. They got a decent quarterback, but I worry about those back-to-back games and then have to come home for West Virginia. They do have an SEC opponent in Arkansas. I think they get over their win total, but I don't know if this team is going to be able to make it to the Big 12 championship game. I think Kansas State, Chris, is the team that goes to the Big 12 championship game to face Utah with that dynamic dual threat quarterback in Avery Johnson. And then when you look at Kansas State's schedule, they really avoid Utah and they get Oklahoma State in their building. They also get Kansas in their building and Arizona in their building. Now they do have to go to Colorado, and I keep coming back to it depends on what you feel about Colorado, right? So I guess we're going to get to that point at some point. I'll just set it off. I think Colorado is a 6-win team. I think they get to a bowl game on the strength of Shedeur Sanders being a guy that I think is going to be the first pick of the draft. So if you have that kind of talent at the quarterback position, I think you should get to a bowl game. But according to football pope Phil Steele, college football got a pope and Phil Steele. College basketball got a pope and Ken Palm. So the two popes of college sports are both right there. The football pope says that Colorado has the 13th toughest schedule in the country. And looking at that schedule, I agree with it. But I think Colorado has enough to get to 6 wins.
Yeah, I could see them getting to 6. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. That schedule is brutal. I think they're more like a 5-7 if things fall their way, 6-win team. I think they're going to have to scratch and fight and claw through those final 3 games like we talked about yesterday and have to win at least 2 or 3 down the stretch, if not all 3, to get to 6-6 and bowl eligibility. But I could see it happening, right? It doesn't mean they're a part of the greater title conversation, though, for national title, certainly, and even Big 12 title, I don't think. What the Big 12, I think, needs to fear, as we are now in this era of the 2 big boys, the Big 10, who we talked about on Monday. You can go back and find it in podcast form. Search BetQL Daily, wherever you get your podcasts, and the SEC, who we'll talk about tomorrow. And then the 2 little brothers, if you want to call them that, would be the Big 12 and the ACC, is that if you're in the Big 12 or the ACC, you've got to cross your fingers, knock on wood, hope that you don't get teams picking each other off. And that's the way the Big 12 schedule sets up this year. Yeah. I laid out how it could set up for 2 powers, 2 top 10 teams to meet in the Big 12 title game. And if the right team beats the right team, both end up going to the playoff. I think it could also set up, because of all of these games that we talked about, like Utah, Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma State, K-State happening on the same, or excuse me, on back-to-back weeks. Arizona, Utah, the same day that Oklahoma State has to go to K-State. All of these big games, BYU, Utah is a rivalry game that's now a part of the Big 12.
Yeah.
That if one of these teams, whether it's Utah, whether it's Oklahoma State, whether it's Kansas State, we can even lump in Arizona because they've got to go to Utah on September 28th, as I mentioned, and they've been talked about on the periphery of this conversation. Their numbers right now at BetMGM, 14-1 to win the conference, plus 650 to go to the CFP. Their win total is only at 7.5, though. All of these teams that are in this conversation, my point is, Corey, they can't be picking each other off. And we all arrive at the Big 12 title game with a pair of two-loss teams who are ranked somewhere around like 10th to 15th. And then one of them beats the other. And so the winner's right there on the edge, or the winner's in, but the second team is totally out of the picture because they've lost 3 games. 3 losses in the Big 12 or the ACC, pardon me, you're gone. You're out.
You can forget about it. And you're right about these teams picking each other off. And the problem not only lies with the teams picking each other off because of the parity in the conference. When you take a deeper dive, right, and you look at the conference, they got to schedule better. You got to start putting these teams in. If the Big 12 thinks that they're going to be able to get 2 teams in the playoff, then they're going to need to have 2 teams with, like, obviously it's going to be a conference champion, but then you're going to need to have teams that compete in the conference championship and have good wins or either good losses. Like, your Texas Tech, you know what I'm saying? And at Washington State is not going to get it done. You see what I'm saying? Like, if you're
Yeah.
Utah, and don't get me wrong, Utah did have Florida on the schedule, but if you're Utah, you need a Michigan on your schedule. You need, one of those teams in the Big Ten or the SEC to help provide a boost when the committee is looking at who these teams is going to get in. And you look and you see, obviously, these coaches are coaching for their careers, but you got to start putting some top opponents on these schedules. Now, Oklahoma State, to their credit, they go to Arkansas this year. That's an SEC school. It's an SEC school that's not that good, but at least they're trying to schedule these games. I give them their credit for that. But they're going to have to step up and go. The SEC and the Big 12, the SEC and the Big 10 is where the power in college football lies, and you need to have those teams on your schedule.